The morning Delia Marsh rode onto the Coldwater property. She had 43 cents in her coat pocket, a bedroll that smelled like 3 weeks of rain, and a horse that had stopped trusting her somewhere around the Manitoba border. She didn't blame the horse. The gate to the Coldwater place was iron, rusted at the hinges, hanging open like it had given up on being closed. The sign above it read Coldwater Ranch in letters that had once been burned deep into the wood but were now barely legible, faded by prairie winters, softened by years of wind off the flats. Beyond the gate, the yard was wide and quiet. A dog barked once from somewhere near the barn, then went silent. Delia sat on her horse and looked at the place for a long moment. It wasn't much. The farmhouse was old, 2 stories, clapboard siding gone gray, one shutter hanging crooked on the upper window. There were cattle in the south pasture. She counted 12 before they drifted behind a rise, and a kitchen garden along the west wall of the house that someone had once tended carefully and was now losing a slow war against the creeping grass. The barn was solid, though, newer than the house. Someone had cared about the animals more than themselves. She noticed that. She walked her horse to the yard gate, swung down from the saddle, and stood there, holding the reins and waiting. The woman who came to the porch door was perhaps 70, small and straight-backed, with white hair pinned close to her head and eyes the pale gray of February sky. She looked at Delia the way someone looks at a thing they can't quite identify, not hostile but careful. She held a dish towel in both hands, turning it slowly. "Help you?" she said. "My name is Delia Marsh," Delia said. "I'm looking for work. I heard in Hatchfield you might need someone who knows cattle." The old woman looked at her horse, then at her bedroll, then at her face. "You heard wrong," she said. "We're not hiring." She went back inside and closed the door. That might have been the end of it. Another door closed on another hard season. Delia had learned not to take it personally. She turned back toward her horse, gathered the reins, set her boot in the stirrup, and stopped. From inside the house came the sound of something heavy falling, and then an old man's voice saying a word she had heard from her own father in moments of real pain, the kind of word a man only uses when things are genuinely wrong. She dropped the reins and went up the porch steps without being invited. His name was August Coldwater. He was 74 years old, and he had fallen in the kitchen trying to move a bag of oats he had no business lifting alone. His wife, Vera Coldwater, the pale-eyed woman from the porch, was kneeling beside him when Delia pushed open the door, and Vera looked up not with anger but with the particular helplessness of a person who has been managing too much alone for too long. Together, Delia and Vera got August up from the floor and into a chair. His ankle was twisted, not broken. Delia had seen enough of both to tell the difference, and the color came back to his face after a few minutes. He was a big man, or had been once, wide through the shoulders, large hands with knuckles swollen from decades of cold mornings. He looked at Delia with dark, unsettled eyes. "You're the girl from outside," he said. "Yes, Vera told you we weren't hiring. She did." He looked at his wife. Vera looked at the floor. "The oats needed moving," he said, as if that explained everything. "They still do," Delia said. "I'll move them." She moved them. It took her about 4 minutes. She stacked the bags against the west wall of the kitchen the way she would have done it on her father's place back in Saskatchewan, close to the door, off the damp floor, with room enough to get between them. When she was done, she washed her hands at the kitchen pump and stood there and waited again. August Coldwater had been watching her from his chair. "Where are you from?" he said. "Originally?" "Aneroid," she said. "Down in the southwest." "Long way from Aneroid, yes. What happened to your father's place?" She looked at him steadily. "Drought took the last of it 3 years ago. He died the year before that. I've been working ranches since. You're young to be drifting. I'm 28, she said. "I'm not drifting. I'm looking for somewhere to be useful." There is a difference, and August Coldwater was old enough to hear it. He said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at his wife again, and this time Vera was already looking back at him, and something passed between them that had no words, the kind of language 2 people build after 50 years of sharing the same worries. Room and board, Vera said finally, not looking at Delia. That's all we can offer right now. That's all I need right now, Delia said. She slept in the room above the barn, which was warmer than it looked and smelled like old hay and pine pitch. There was a cot, a window that faced east, and a small iron stove that drew well once she cleaned the flue. She had her bedroll and her saddlebags and a paperback novel she had read twice already, and a photograph of her parents standing in front of a wheat field that no longer existed. She put the photograph face down on the sill. She didn't need to see it. She just needed to know it was there. The next morning she was up before the cold waters, fed and watered the cattle before August could make it out to the yard, and had the south fence line walked and the weak posts marked before noon. At lunch, Vera put a plate in front of her without comment. August looked at the fence report Delia had written on the back of an old receipt and said nothing, but he read it twice. The east gate latch is going too, Delia said. I'll fix it this afternoon if you have the hardware. Hardware's in the barn. Second shelf on the left. All right. You knew where the weak posts would be, August said. That side faces north, takes the wind. Always breaks down first. He looked at her. You been on a lot of ranches? Enough. He didn't ask anything else, but he stopped watching her like she was a problem waiting to happen. That was the first week. By the third week, she had repaired the fence line, replaced the east gate latch, patched the roof of the smaller outbuilding where the tools were stored, moved the cattle to the upper pasture for the late grass, and fixed the water trough in the south yard that had been leaking into the soil since spring. She had also, quietly, begun cooking dinner 3 nights a week when Vera's arthritis was bad, which was most nights. Vera did not thank her for this. She did not need to. She simply set an extra place at the table and passed the salt without being asked. It was not kindness given easily. Delia understood that. These were people who had been hurt by trust. There was a son. She pieced this together slowly, from photographs on the mantel and a room upstairs kept closed, and from the way August sometimes stopped talking mid-sentence and stared at a place on the wall that had nothing on it. His name had been James. He had died 6 years ago. A winter accident, the kind the prairies specialize in. A moment's bad luck at the wrong temperature. The closed room had been his. Delia never went near that door. The trouble started in October. His name was Gordon Flett, and he owned the property east of Coldwater Ranch, and he had been wanting the Coldwater grazing rights along the creek bottom for at least a decade. Delia figured this out on her own, over time, by watching the way August's jaw tightened whenever Flett's truck came up the road, and by listening to the conversations that stopped when she walked into the kitchen. She said nothing. But she was there the afternoon Flett drove in and got out of his truck and stood in the yard with his hat in his hand and his lawyer's letter folded in his coat pocket. He was perhaps 55, broad, prosperous-looking in a way that always made Delia think of things expanding at the expense of other things. August came out to meet him. He was walking on the ankle still, not well. Delia was working on the barn door 10 feet away, and she did not stop working. August, Flett said, I wanted to bring this personally, out of respect. You can keep your respect, August said. What does it say? It's an offer. Fair market value for the creek bottom parcels. My lawyer, I know what your lawyer does. You're not getting any younger, August. Vera's not well. You don't have anyone to. He stopped. He had seen Delia. She was looking at him. She had not stopped working on the door. She held a hammer loosely in her right hand, and she looked at Gordon Flett with the particular steadiness of a person who is not afraid of him and wants him to know it without making a scene about it. Flett looked back at August. Who is she? She works here, August said. Since when? Since she asked for a job and I gave her one. What else is in that letter, Gordon? Flett left 20 minutes later without getting what he came for. August watched the truck until it was gone from sight. Then he turned and looked at Delia. You didn't have to stay there, he said. I was fixing the door. You could have gone into the barn. The door needed fixing, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he'll come back. I imagine he will, Delia said. I'll still be here. she said it simply, the way you say something true that doesn't need decoration. August Coldwater looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, the way he hadn't since the first day, and then he nodded once and went back inside. That evening, Vera made butter tarts and put them on the table without explanation. Delia ate 3 of them. She was fairly sure that was Vera saying something she didn't have words for. Flett came back in November with 2 men from a different law firm and a revised offer, and a lot of language about easements and municipal assessments and the difficulty of maintaining cattle operations into advanced age. Delia was in the house this time. Vera had asked her to come in for the meeting. Asked her quietly and without explanation, and Delia had washed her hands and come in and sat at the kitchen table and said nothing at all. She didn't need to say anything. She sat there with her hands folded and her expression neutral, and her presence in that kitchen spoke clearly enough. This is not a place with no one to stand up for it. This is not a property that will fold when pushed. After the lawyers left, August sat down heavily in his chair and rubbed his face. "The offer's not terrible," he said. "That's the honest truth." "No," Vera said. She was standing at the stove with her back to both of them. "It isn't terrible. We could." "No." She turned around. Her pale eyes were steady and her voice was quiet, and there was nothing uncertain in either. "James loved this land. I'm not selling it to a man who used to steal from our apple tree when he was 12 years old and has been trying to take something of ours ever since." The kitchen was very quiet. Then August looked at Delia. "You have thoughts?" "I think," Delia said carefully, "that the creek bottom is worth more than he's offering. And I think if you tighten up the east fence and graze that section properly through spring, you could bring in 20 more head by summer, which changes the numbers considerably." August looked at her. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about it," she said. "I think about this place." She said it plainly, without meaning for it to sound like anything more than information, but it landed in the room and stayed there. August looked at Vera, and Vera looked at her bowl of water on the counter, and nobody said anything for a while. "Show me the numbers," August said finally. She showed him the numbers. She had written them on a piece of paper she'd been carrying in her coat pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. December came in hard, the way it does in that part of Alberta, with a wind off the mountains that made the barn creak and drove the temperature down to the kind of cold that clarifies things. Delia got up before dawn every morning, and she did not complain, and she did not ask for anything, and the cattle came through in good condition because she watched them the way her father had taught her, constantly, patiently, with the understanding that animals will tell you what they need if you're paying attention. One morning in December, she found August already in the barn when she arrived. He was standing in front of the last stall, the one that had been empty since she arrived, looking at something she couldn't see. She came and stood beside him. In the stall was a saddle, well made, the leather oiled and cared for. A boy's saddle fitted for someone younger and smaller than August. "James's," August said. He wasn't looking at her. "It's a good saddle," Delia said. "He was a good rider." A pause. "He would have been 40 this spring." She stood beside him and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Some grief doesn't want words. It just wants a witness. After a while, August straightened up and put his hand briefly on the saddle horn and then turned away. "Feed's getting low in the east section," he said. "I saw that. I was going to drive out this afternoon. I'll come with you." "All right." They drove out together in the truck across the frozen upper pasture, and August told her about the lay of the land, where the water ran in spring, where the frost came earliest, which sections could hold cattle in a dry year, and which couldn't be trusted. He talked about the land the way people talk about something they love and are afraid of losing. Delia listened carefully and did not say much, but she remembered everything. That was the afternoon she understood that August Coldwater was not just teaching her about his property. He was making sure someone else knew it too. He was making sure the knowledge of this place would outlast him. She drove home with her hands steady on the wheel and something aching quietly in her chest. January was when everything shifted. Gordon Flett had apparently decided that if legal letters and formal offers weren't working, inconvenience might. Two of the Coldwater cattle came up missing from the east section on a Tuesday, the section closest to the fence line that bordered Flett's property. August was going to go over himself. Delia went instead. She rode the fence line in the early morning cold, following the tracks in the snow, cattle tracks, and then 100 yards from the corner post, boot prints. 2 sets, going both ways. She followed them to a gap in the wire she had not made and had not seen before. A section cut neatly and then pressed back into approximate place. She found the cattle in the creek bottom on Flett's side of the line, penned loosely with a temporary panel. She opened the panel and walked them home. Then she went back and fixed the fence. She did not call the police. She did not tell August, not immediately. She went back to the barn, and she stood there in the cold, and she thought about what she was going to do, which is not the same as reacting, and is almost always more effective. What she did was this. She wrote down the date, the location, the description of the boot prints, and the condition of the cut wire, and she kept that paper in her coat pocket. The next week when it happened again, she wrote that down too. She was patient. She had been patient her whole life. When she had 3 incidents documented, she drove into Hatchfield and spoke to the Municipal Agricultural Office about fence line violations and the process for formal complaint. The woman at the counter looked at her documentation and raised her eyebrows slightly and said she'd seen this kind of thing before and that Delia had what she needed. She drove back to Coldwater Ranch and told August everything. He sat at the kitchen table and read her notes slowly. Vera stood at the stove and did not turn around. "You could have told me sooner," August said. "I wanted to be sure," Delia said. "I wanted it to be clean." He read the notes again. "You fixed the fence both times. Both times. You didn't go over there and make a scene." "No." He put the paper down and looked at her across the table. He was quiet for a long time. The kitchen smelled like coffee and wood smoke and the particular warmth of a house that has been lived in for 50 years. "Why?" he said. She understood what he was asking, not why she'd documented it or why she'd been patient. He was asking why she was still here, why she had done any of it. A young woman from somewhere else, owed nothing by these people, with no contract and no promise of anything permanent. She thought about her father, who had loved land that was taken from him by something he couldn't fight. She thought about the photograph lying face down on the windowsill above the barn. She thought about James Coldwater's saddle in the last stall and about August, standing in front of it with his hand on the horn. "Because this land deserves someone who will take care of it," she said, "and so do you." Vera made a small sound that was not quite a word. She still had her back to them. She turned the burner down on the stove, and then she stood there with both hands on the counter, and she didn't say anything, and she didn't have to. Gordon Flett received a formal complaint from the Alberta Agricultural Land Dispute Office in February. He received it certified, which meant he had to sign for it, which meant he knew they knew. The incident stopped. Spring came slowly, the way it does on those flats, reluctantly, in fits and starts, with setbacks and cold snaps and one last hard frost in May that Delia had seen coming and warned them about, and they had moved the cattle accordingly. By June, the east section was holding 23 new head, exactly as Delia had projected. August started talking about the deed. Not all at once, not formally. It began with small things. He started showing Delia where the property documents were kept, the original surveys, the maintenance records for the well and the septic. He explained the lease arrangement on the north section as if he expected her to need to know it someday. He told her about the Coldwater family's arrangement with the neighboring Métis community regarding a shared water access that had to be renewed every 5 years and how to do that renewal properly. Delia listened to all of it. She wrote things down. She asked questions. One evening in late June, she was sitting on the porch after dinner, looking out over the south pasture in the long prairie light that turns everything gold at that hour, when August came out and sat in the other chair. They sat quietly for a while. Vera and I have talked, he said. Delia waited. We'd like to amend the arrangement, if you're willing. What kind of amendment? Partial ownership. Of the working operation. Not the land, not yet. But the cattle, the equipment, the income rights. A third to start. She looked out at the pasture, at the cattle moving slowly in the evening light, at the fence she had fixed and the gate she had rehung and the water trough that no longer leaked. I haven't got money to buy in, she said. We're not asking for money. She looked at him. We're asking for what you've already been giving, he said, and for you to keep giving it. She was quiet for a long time. The light changed across the pasture. A killdeer called somewhere out past the fence line, that particular sound that means something is close to its nest and afraid and refusing to leave anyway. All right, she said. August nodded once. He picked up the cup of coffee he'd brought out with him and took a slow drink. You'll want a lawyer to look at the paperwork, he said. I know a woman in Hatchfield, Delia said. She's good. Is she honest? Brutally. Good, August said. That's what we need. There are stories that end with dramatic reversals, with confrontations and